Today we have 5 night shift horror stories for you to listen to. These are real events that happen to people working the graveyard shift, when most of the world sleeps and darkness reveals its true nature. Our first story tonight comes from a night cook who discovered that some restaurants have very special ingredients on their menu. The meat delivery comes from the basement where they keep the missing truckers. My name is Tommy Martinez, and I worked the night shift at Hank's Roadside Diner on Highway 287 in rural Texas for exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks that changed everything I thought I knew about human nature and the taste of meat. I needed work bad. Had been unemployed for 2 months after the plant closed, bills piling up, family depending on me. When I saw the ad for night cook at a highway diner, decent pay, I jumped on it without asking too many questions. Hank Crawley seemed like a regular guy when he hired me. Big man, probably 60, with calloused hands and a friendly smile. The diner was clean, well-maintained, popular with truckers who said it served the best steaks between Dallas and El Paso. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Simple menu, mostly steaks, burgers, and chops. The meat came pre-cut, vacuum-sealed, stored in the walk-in freezer. All I had to do was cook it to order and keep the coffee fresh. The first week went smooth. Truckers would roll in throughout the night, order the house special steak, and rave about how good it was. Never had beef this tender, they'd say. What's your secret recipe? Best meat on the highway. Hands down. I took pride in that. Thought I was just a good cook. But something bothered me about the meat deliveries. They came at 3 a.m., which seemed strange for a food supplier, and they didn't go through the kitchen. Hank would meet the truck out back, and they'd carry the boxes down to the basement through an outside entrance. When I asked Hank about it, he said the basement had better freezer space, kept the meat fresher. Made sense, I guess. The second week, I started noticing other things. The diner was covered with missing person flyers. All truckers, all men who disappeared along this stretch of highway over the past 2 years. Hank said the state police used his place as a posting spot because so many drivers passed through. But what struck me was how many there were. 23 missing truckers in 2 years, all from this area. All described as traveling alone, making regular runs through Texas. That same week, I found something in the meat grinder that shouldn't have been there. A driver's license, blood-stained, belonging to a man named Marcus Webb. According to the date, he'd been missing for 6 months. According to the missing person flyer on the wall, he was last seen at a truck stop 30 miles from here. I confronted Hank about it. He looked at the license, shrugged, said it must have gotten mixed in with the beef somehow. Accident at the processing plant, probably. These things happen in the meat business. But his eyes went cold when he said it. And I noticed him watching me more carefully after that. The third week, I decided to find out what was really in that basement. Hank kept the basement key on a ring with his truck keys. Tuesday night, he left them on the office desk when he went out for a smoke break. I grabbed the key and slipped downstairs. What I found down there will haunt me for the rest of my life. It wasn't a freezer. It was a butcher shop. Professional meat processing equipment, stainless steel tables, industrial meat saws, and hanging hooks. But this wasn't for cattle. There were 3 men chained to the wall. Truckers, by their clothes. One was unconscious, the other 2 were barely alive. Too weak to even lift their heads when I came down the stairs. On the processing tables were body parts. Human arms, legs, torsos, all being prepared like beef cuts. The vacuum-sealed packages I'd been cooking upstairs weren't beef at all. For 3 weeks, I'd been serving human meat to innocent truckers who thought they were eating the best steaks of their lives. I tried to free the chained men, but they were too weak to move. One of them, barely conscious, whispered that his name was David Chen, and he'd been missing for 2 weeks. His family was looking for him. That's when I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Hank came down with two other men I'd never seen before. They were carrying a fourth trucker, unconscious, ready to add him to the collection. "Well, Tommy," Hank said calmly, "looks like you found our little operation." He explained it like it was a business plan. Truckers make perfect victims because they travel alone, often don't have fixed schedules, and nobody misses them right away. The diner's location was perfect for picking targets, isolated enough that screams don't carry. But the genius part, he said, was turning the victims into the product. The other truckers loved the taste so much they kept coming back, bringing friends, spreading word about the amazing steaks. Business had never been better. "You've been part of something special, Tommy," he said. "Do you know how many truckers have complimented your cooking? How many have said it's the best meat they've ever tasted?" The horror of it hit me then. Dozens of innocent men had eaten human flesh because of me. They'd gone home to their families, kissed their wives, played with their children, never knowing what they'd consumed. Hank offered me a choice. Keep working, keep quiet, and get a raise. Or join the men chained to the wall. I chose a third option. I grabbed a meat cleaver from the processing table and started swinging. Caught Hank across the shoulder, put one of his men down permanently, and fought my way up the basement stairs while they were trying to stop the bleeding. I ran to my car, drove straight to the state police barracks in the next county, told them everything, brought them back to the diner. But when we got there, the place was empty. Hank and his crew were gone, the basement was cleaned out, and there was no evidence of what I'd seen. They'd had hours to sanitize everything. The police found traces of human blood in the basement drain, enough to launch an investigation. But Hank and his operation had vanished completely. 3 months later, they found a mass grave in the woods behind the diner. 27 bodies, all truckers who'd been reported missing over the past 3 years. The forensic evidence confirmed what I'd told them about the butcher operation. But Hank Crawley was never found. Neither were his accomplices. The diner was torn down, the property condemned. But sometimes I wonder if they just moved their operation somewhere else. Another highway, another remote location, another menu featuring the best steaks truckers have ever tasted. I can't eat meat anymore, can't work in restaurants, can't drive past diners without wondering what's really being served inside. And late at night, I think about all those truckers who complimented my cooking during those 3 weeks. How they praised the tenderness, the flavor, the quality of the meat. They'll never know the truth about what they ate. Maybe that's for the best, but I'll carry that knowledge for the rest of my life. And I'll never stop wondering how many other places like Hank's roadside diner are out there, serving their special recipes to unsuspecting customers. The highway is full of hungry travelers looking for a good meal. And some restaurants will go to any length to give their customers exactly what they're craving. Our second story tonight involves a hotel night clerk who discovered that some guests check out, but they never really leave. Our second story tonight comes from an ICU nurse who learned that some patients never really recover from their injuries. The coma patient has been speaking Latin in 3 different voices. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been working ICU night shifts at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago for 6 years. I've seen everything you can imagine in intensive care. Car accidents, overdoses, heart attacks, strokes. But what happened with patient John Doe in room 314 last month still gives me nightmares. John Doe was brought in after a head-on collision on Lakeshore Drive. Mid-30s, no identification, no family came forward. Severe head trauma, multiple fractures, but stable vital signs. The doctors said his brain activity was normal, just needed time to wake up from the coma. He'd been unconscious for 2 weeks when I first noticed something strange. During my rounds at 2 a.m., I heard him talking. Not unusual for coma patients to mumble or make sounds, but this was different. He was speaking clearly in what sounded like a foreign language. I moved closer to his bed and listened. The words were Latin. I recognized some phrases from my Catholic school days, but this was more complex, more fluent than anything I'd heard in church. Mors tua, vita mea, he said clearly. Your death. My life. His eyes were still closed. Monitors showed he was in deep unconsciousness, but his mouth was moving with deliberate pronunciation, like someone was speaking through him. I made a note in his chart and mentioned it to Dr. Rodriguez during morning rounds. He said it was probably random neural firing, brain trying to process trauma. Sometimes patients speak in languages they learned years ago, but that night it got worse. Around 1 a.m. I heard John Doe talking again. This time his voice was different, deeper, older, with an accent I couldn't place. Still Latin, but the phrases were longer, more complex. I called Father McKenna, the hospital chaplain, and asked him to listen. He went pale when he heard what the patient was saying. He's reciting parts of the Ritual Romanum, Father McKenna whispered. The Roman ritual, specifically sections about demonic possession and exorcism. That's impossible, I said. He's been in a coma for 2 weeks. How could he know those words? Father McKenna looked troubled. These aren't just any sections, Sarah. These are responses that demons give during exorcism. Things I've only read in restricted church documents. The third night, everything changed. I was checking John Doe's vitals at 3 AU when his voice started again. But this time I heard something that made my blood freeze. It wasn't one voice. It was 3 voices speaking simultaneously. One voice was high-pitched, almost childlike. Another was deep and masculine. The third was female with a strange, echoing quality. All 3 were speaking different Latin phrases at the same time, creating a horrifying chorus coming from one man's mouth. His body remained motionless, eyes closed, but his mouth moved with impossible coordination to produce 3 distinct vocal tones. I ran to get Dr. Rodriguez, but by the time we returned, John Doe was silent. The monitors showed normal sleep patterns. Dr. Rodriguez thought I was having stress hallucinations. But I knew what I'd heard. I started researching the hospital's history during my breaks. St. Mary's was built in 1924 on the site of an old convent, St. Catherine's, which had operated from 1887 to 1923. What I found in the newspaper archives made my hands shake. In October 1923, 3 nuns at St. Catherine's Convent had been found dead in the chapel. The official cause was listed as heart failure, but witness accounts described something far more disturbing. According to testimony from surviving nuns, Sisters Mary Catherine, Agnes, and Rose had been acting strangely for weeks before their deaths, speaking in unknown languages, showing impossible knowledge of people's secrets, displaying superhuman strength. The Mother Superior had requested help from the Archdiocese, and Father Vincent Toretti was sent to perform an exorcism. But something went wrong during the ritual. All 3 nuns died simultaneously at 3:33 a.m., and Father Toretti was found catatonic, never speaking again until his death years later. The convent was demolished, and St. Mary's Hospital was built on the exact same ground. The 4th night, I understood why. At 3:30 AU, John Doe's body began to change. His back arched off the bed, his arms spread wide like he was being crucified. The 3 voices started again, but now they were screaming. The temperature in room 314 dropped so fast I could see my breath. The heart monitor, IV pump, and ventilator all malfunctioned simultaneously. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, I heard the 3 voices clearly. The child's voice, "We are Mary Catherine." The man's voice, "We are Agnes." The woman's voice, "We are Rose. All 3 together, we have been waiting." Emergency power kicked in. And in the dim backup lighting, I saw John Doe's body levitating 6 inches above the mattress. His head was turned at an impossible angle, and his eyes were open, showing only whites. But the worst part was what happened to the other patients. Mrs. Patterson in 312, stable condition after gallbladder surgery, flatlined. Mr. Kim in 316, recovering from a mild heart attack, went into cardiac arrest. Jenny Morrison, a 19-year-old car accident victim in 318, stopped breathing. All at exactly 3:33 a.m. I hit every emergency button I could reach and started CPR on Mrs. Patterson while calling for the crash team. But I could hear John Doe's 3 voices laughing behind me, a sound like breaking glass mixed with children crying. The crash team managed to revive 2 of the 3 patients, but Jenny Morrison was declared brain dead. She'd been making steady progress until that moment. I told Dr. Rodriguez everything, showed him the research about the convent, begged him to get a priest. He threatened to have me committed for psychiatric evaluation. But Father McKenna believed me. He'd heard the voices himself. That night, Father McKenna came to perform an emergency blessing on room 314. He brought holy water, crucifixes, and a copy of the Ritual Romanum. What happened during that blessing will haunt me forever. The moment Father McKenna began the prayers, John Doe's body convulsed violently. The 3 voices screamed in unison, using profanity and blasphemy I'd never heard before. They spoke about things they couldn't possibly know. Father McKenna's childhood, his doubts about faith, his secret struggles with alcoholism. The hospital's electrical system went haywire. Elevators stopped working, computers crashed, emergency generators failed. It was like the building itself was fighting against the blessing. For 47 minutes, Father McKenna battled whatever was inside John Doe. I held the patient's legs while 2 orderlies held his arms as his body tried to throw us across the room with superhuman strength. Finally, at 4:17 a.m., the 3 voices gave one final scream and went silent. John Doe's body relaxed, his vital signs stabilized, and the hospital's systems came back online. But John Doe never woke up. He died peacefully at 6:22 a.m. just as my shift ended. The official cause of death was listed as complications from head trauma. No mention was made of the possession, the voices, or the failed electrical systems. I transferred to day shift the following week. Haven't worked nights at St. Mary's since. But sometimes when I pass room 314 during the day, I swear I can hear faint whispers in Latin coming from inside. The room has been renovated twice since then, but they can't seem to keep patients alive in there for more than a few days. Father McKenna left St. Mary's a month later and now works at a rural parish upstate. He won't talk about what happened that night, but I heard he's requested additional training in exorcism from the Vatican. The 3 nuns who died in 1923 are still buried in the cemetery behind the hospital. Their graves are the only ones on the grounds that never have flowers or visitors. But every October, on the anniversary of their deaths, the groundskeepers find the grass around their graves burned in perfect crosses, as if something tried to claw its way out of the earth. Some places hold on to their past, no matter how many buildings you construct over them. And some spirits never rest, especially when they died fighting something more powerful than themselves. The living aren't the only ones who need intensive care. Our third story tonight involves a security guard who discovered that some office buildings never really close. Our third story tonight comes from a software engineer who learned that some rides you give to strangers cost much more than just fuel. The beautiful woman asked for a ride, but the chocolate she offered changed my life forever. My name is David Martinez, and I've been working night shifts at Tech Core Solutions in Austin, Texas for 3 years. Same routine every night. Leave home at 10 p.m., drive through the quiet streets to reach office by 10:30, work until 6 a.m. It's peaceful driving at night, less traffic, cooler weather, just me and the empty roads. October 15th, 2008. That date is burned into my memory because it's the night my normal life ended. I was driving my usual route down South Lamar when I saw her standing at the bus stop near the Whole Foods. Even from a distance, something about her caught my attention. Maybe it was the way she stood perfectly still under the streetlight, or how her white dress seemed to glow in the darkness. As I got closer, she raised her hand for a ride. I normally don't pick up strangers, but something made me pull over. Maybe it was the late hour or the fact that she looked harmless, a young woman alone on the empty road. When she got into the passenger seat, I forgot how to breathe. She was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Perfect features, olive skin, and eyes that seemed to hold depths I couldn't understand. Her hair was long and black, falling in waves over her shoulders. She wore a simple white sundress, but she looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice soft and musical. "I need to go to downtown near the river. My car broke down." "No problem," I said, trying not to stare too obviously. "I'm David. What's your name?" She smiled, and it was like watching the sunrise. "Maria," she said. "You're very kind to help a stranger." We started talking as I drove. She had this way of looking at me while I spoke, like every word I said was the most interesting thing she'd ever heard. Her eyes were mesmerizing, large and dark with long lashes. I found myself getting lost in them every time I glanced over. About halfway downtown, she reached into her purse and pulled out a chocolate bar. It was an expensive imported brand, the kind you see in fancy shops. "I'm diabetic," she said, breaking off a piece. "Have to keep my sugar levels up. Would you like some? It's very good quality." She offered me the bar, and I took a small piece. It was incredibly rich, almost too sweet, with an unusual aftertaste I couldn't identify. Something herbal, maybe medicinal. "Take more," she insisted, breaking off another piece. "You're working all night. You need energy." I ate the second piece to be polite, though the strange aftertaste was stronger now. It left a tingling sensation on my tongue. We reached her destination, a quiet street near Lady Bird Lake where expensive condos lined the waterfront. She thanked me again, her hand briefly touching mine as she got out of the car. I drove to the office thinking about her eyes, her smile, the way she looked at me. I couldn't concentrate on my work. All I could think about was Maria. Around 2 a.m. I started feeling strange. A mild headache at first, then something else. A burning sensation in my chest like someone was slowly cutting through my ribs with a hot knife. The pain got worse. I was sweating, my hands shaking as I tried to type code. I got up to ask my coworker Jake for help, but when I opened my mouth to speak, no sound came out. My lips were moving, I could feel them forming words, but there was no voice. Just silence. Jake looked at me strangely. "You okay, man? You look pale." I tried to tell him about the pain, about not being able to speak properly, but still no sound emerged. Panic set in. I grabbed a pen and paper, wrote, "Can't talk, chest pain, help." Jake drove me to the emergency room at St. David's Hospital. The doctors ran every test they could think of. Blood work, EKGs, chest x-rays, CT scans, everything came back normal. "Your vocal cords look fine," Dr. Peterson said. "Your heart is healthy, lungs are clear. I can't find anything wrong with you physically, but I knew something was very wrong." The chest pain continued, and my voice came and went randomly. Sometimes I could speak normally, other times I'd open my mouth and nothing would come out. Over the next few weeks, stranger things started happening. I'd wake up with scratches on my chest that weren't there when I went to sleep. My reflection in mirrors looked different, older, more tired. Food lost its taste and I stopped feeling hungry. I went to more doctors, specialists, psychiatrists. Nobody could explain what was happening to me. That's when I started researching online looking for answers. I found forums about supernatural experiences, people describing similar symptoms. The common thread was always the same. They'd accepted food or drink from a stranger and their lives had changed forever. One post caught my attention. A woman from New Mexico described giving a ride to a beautiful stranger who offered her candy. The same chest pain, the same voice problems, the same gradual deterioration of health. She wrote, "It's been 12 years since that night. The doctors can't find anything wrong, but I know I'm dying slowly. Whatever she gave me is eating me from the inside. Some days I can't speak, some days I can't eat, some days I can barely get out of bed. I've tried everything, doctors, priests, curanderas, nothing works. She cursed me with that candy and I'll never be free." I realized then what had happened to me. Maria, the beautiful woman with the perfect smile, had done something to that chocolate. Some kind of curse, some dark magic that was slowly destroying my life. I tried to find her, drove back to where I'd dropped her off, asked around the neighborhood. Nobody had ever seen her. The address she'd given me didn't exist. It's been 15 years since that night. 15 years of unexplained pain, of my voice failing me at crucial moments, of waking up with marks on my body that I didn't put there. I've lost 3 jobs because of my unreliable speech. My wife left me because she thought I was faking it for attention. My friends stopped calling because I couldn't hold normal conversations. The doctors still find nothing wrong. My medical records show a perfectly healthy man, but I know the truth. That chocolate was poisoned with something no medical test can detect. Every night when I drive to work, I see her sometimes, standing at different bus stops, wearing the same white dress, holding her purse. Always beautiful, always smiling, always looking for the next kind stranger to help her. I've tried to warn other drivers, but they think I'm crazy. Who would believe a story like this? The curse is still with me. Some days are worse than others, but it never goes away completely. I've learned to live with the pain, with the silence that comes and goes, with the slow erosion of everything I used to be. If you're driving at night and see a beautiful woman asking for a ride, keep driving. If she offers you food or drink, don't take it. Some kindness comes with a price that you'll spend the rest of your life paying. The chocolate was sweet, but the aftertaste has lasted 15 years and counting. My name is Robert Chen, and I worked as night security at Lincoln Elementary School in Portland, Oregon for 15 years. 15 years of quiet nights, empty hallways, and the familiar sounds of an old building settling. The school was like a second home to me. Every creaking floorboard, every shadow, every corner as familiar as my own house. Maybe more familiar since my divorce 3 years ago left me with partial custody of my 8-year-old son, Tommy. The nights he stayed with me were the hardest, trying to balance a single parent's responsibilities with a job that kept me away from home. November 12, 2019. Tommy had been begging me for weeks to bring him to work, said he was bored at home and wanted to see where Daddy worked at night. Against my better judgment, I finally agreed. Just once, I told myself. What could go wrong in an elementary school? I should have known better. Tommy was excited as we walked through the empty hallways at 10 p.m. He'd been to the school during the day for various events, but seeing it dark and empty fascinated him. His voice echoed in the corridors as he asked questions about my job, about why all the lights were off, about whether I ever got scared. Never, I told him. It's just a school, buddy. Nothing scary about a place where kids learn and play. We settled into the security office where I had a small TV and some chairs. Tommy brought his tablet and headphones, promised he'd be quiet and just watch cartoons while I did my rounds. For the first few hours, everything went perfectly. Around 1 a.m., I dozed off in my chair. Long nights and single parenting had caught up with me. When I woke up at 2:30, Tommy was gone. I wasn't immediately panicked. Kids explore and the school was locked up tight. I figured he'd wandered off to look around, maybe curious about the classrooms in the dark. "Tommy," I called softly, not wanting to shout in the quiet building. "Time to come back to the office." No response. I started walking the hallways, checking each classroom, the library, the cafeteria, all empty. I called his name louder, my voice echoing off the walls. That's when I heard it, a child's voice, faint and distant, coming from the east wing of the building. "Daddy, help me." It was Tommy's voice, but something was wrong with it. It sounded far away, muffled, like he was calling from inside a box or behind thick glass. I ran toward the sound, following it down the hallway to classroom 2B, Mrs. Henderson's second-grade room. The door was open, which was strange because I'd locked all the classrooms during my evening rounds. "Tommy," I called as I entered the room. "Where are you?" The voice came again, but now it seemed to be coming from outside. I looked toward the windows and saw something that made my blood freeze. The large oak tree that grew outside classroom 2B had its branches pressed against the window. But that wasn't possible. That tree was at least 15 feet from the building. I'd walked past it every night for 15 years. But somehow the thick branches were now reaching through the open window, extending deep into the classroom like gnarled fingers searching for something. And from somewhere within those branches, I could hear Tommy calling for help. I ran to the window and looked outside. The tree was enormous, much larger than I remembered. Its trunk was easily 20 feet across, its branches spreading in all directions like a massive web. And there, about 10 feet up, caught in the crook of two large branches, was Tommy. But he wasn't struggling. He wasn't moving at all. He was just hanging there, perfectly still, his eyes closed like he was sleeping. "Tommy!" I shouted. "Tommy, wake up!" I tried to climb out the window to reach him, but the moment I touched one of the branches, it moved. Not swaying in the wind, but deliberately moving like a living thing responding to my touch. The branch wrapped around my wrist and I felt something I'd never experienced before. A pulling sensation, not physical, but something deeper. Like the tree was trying to drain something from inside me. I yanked my hand back and stumbled away from the window, my heart pounding. When I looked again, Tommy was gone. Not fallen, not moved to a different branch. Gone completely, like he'd been absorbed into the wood itself. I ran outside, circling the tree, looking up into its branches, calling Tommy's name until my voice was hoarse. But there was no sign of him anywhere. I called 911, called my ex-wife, called everyone I could think of. The police came. Search and rescue teams, even helicopters with thermal imaging. They searched for 3 days. They found nothing. The investigators said there was no evidence Tommy had ever been in the tree. No torn clothing, no footprints in the dirt around the trunk. No sign of a struggle. The security cameras, which should have recorded everything, had mysteriously malfunctioned between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. that night. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. The official report concluded that Tommy had somehow left the school building and wandered off into the surrounding neighborhood. They theorized he'd gotten lost in the woods behind the school and succumbed to exposure. His body was never found. I couldn't accept that. I spent weeks researching the history of Lincoln Elementary, the land it was built on, that oak tree. What I found changed everything. The school was built in 1967 on the site of the old Riverside Orphanage, which had operated from 1889 to 1955. The orphanage had been shut down after a scandal involving the disappearance of 12 children over a period of 20 years. According to newspaper reports from that era, the children had all vanished from their dormitory rooms on the second floor, always at night, always without a trace. The authorities suspected foul play by the staff, but no evidence was ever found. The orphanage was demolished in 1965, but one thing remained: the giant oak tree that had grown in the courtyard. The tree that now stood outside classroom 2B. I found a photograph from 1954, the year before the orphanage closed. It showed the oak tree, and there was something horrifying about it. Embedded in the bark, barely visible but unmistakably there, were what looked like children's faces. Dozens of them, their features pressed into the wood like they were trying to push out from inside the tree. The photograph was grainy and old, but I could make out small hands reaching from between the branches, tiny fingers extending from the bark itself. I went back to the school that night, armed with an axe. I was going to cut down that tree, get Tommy back, free all the children it had taken over the decades, but when I arrived, the tree had changed again. It was bigger now, its trunk even more massive, and there, clearly visible in the bark about 8 feet up, was Tommy's face. His eyes were closed, his expression peaceful, but it was definitely him. His features were pressed into the wood like a relief sculpture, as if he was sleeping just beneath the surface. I touched the bark where his face was, and I felt him, felt his warmth, felt him breathing. He was alive inside the tree, but he was also becoming part of it. Over the past 3 years, I've watched Tommy's face slowly sink deeper into the bark. His features are becoming less distinct, more integrated with the wood grain. Sometimes I think I can see his fingers growing from the smaller branches, his hair becoming part of the moss that covers the upper trunk. The tree continues to grow. New branches appear regularly, always reaching toward the school windows. Other faces have appeared in the bark too, dozens of children from different eras, all slowly being absorbed into the ancient wood. I tried cutting into the tree once, but when I made the first incision with my saw, I heard screaming. Not from one child, but from dozens of them crying out in pain and terror from inside the wood. I couldn't continue. I couldn't hurt them. The school district has tried to have the tree removed several times, but every crew they hire finds excuses to abandon the job. Equipment failures, workers getting sick. One crew reported that the tree was fighting back when they tried to cut it. I still work at Lincoln Elementary. Different shift now, day security instead of nights. I can't bear to be there in the darkness anymore. But every morning when I arrive for work, I check on Tommy. His face is still there, still visible in the bark, still peaceful. Sometimes I think I can see him smile when I talk to him. The tree has fed on children for over a century. It lured them to the windows with voices, with promises, with the curiosity that comes naturally to young minds. And once they touch its branches, they become part of its eternal collection. I should have cut it down years ago, should have recognized the danger. But it's too late now. Tommy is part of the tree forever, and the tree is part of him. In some terrible way, he's still alive, still growing, still dreaming inside that ancient wood. If you ever see a tree growing too close to a school, reaching its branches toward the windows, listen carefully on quiet nights. You might hear the voices of all the children it's collected over the years calling out to anyone who will listen. But don't touch the branches, don't try to help. Some things are hungrier than they appear, and some appetites can never be satisfied. Our fifth and final story tonight comes from a man who learned that some stores sell more than just clothes. I bought a shirt from a store that burned down 3 years ago. My name is Marcus Johnson, and I work as an accountant in downtown Detroit. Last Saturday, I did something I rarely do. Went shopping at Eastland Mall for some new clothes for a job interview. I'm not much of a shopper, usually just grab whatever's on sale and get out. But this interview was important, so I figured I'd invest in something decent. I found this men's clothing store on the 2nd floor right between the Gap and Bath & Body Works. Nice setup, modern displays, good selection. The sign said Brennan's Fine Menswear in gold letters. The salesman was an older guy, maybe 60s, very professional. Helped me pick out a navy blue suit, white dress shirt, and a silk tie. Quality stuff, but reasonably priced. The whole outfit came to $240, which seemed like a steal for clothes that nice. When I got home, I hung everything in my closet and didn't think about it again until Monday morning. Interview day. I put on the shirt first and immediately something felt wrong. The fabric was rough against my skin, scratchy in a way it hadn't been when I tried it on. But I figured new shirts sometimes feel stiff before you wash them. Then I looked in the mirror. The shirt was covered in burn marks. Black charred spots all over the fabric like someone had held a cigarette to it in dozens of places. The collar was singed, the sleeves had holes burned through them. I thought maybe something had happened to it in my closet, though I couldn't imagine what. I checked the suit and tie. Same thing. Burned, damaged, completely unwearable. I was furious. I'd spent $240 on clothes that were ruined, and I had an interview in 2 hours. I drove back to Eastland Mall, ready to demand my money back. But when I got to the second floor, the store wasn't there. Where Brennan's Fine Menswear had been was just an empty space with metal security gates pulled down. A sign hung on the gate. Space under construction, coming soon. I thought maybe I'd remembered the location wrong, so I walked around the entire second floor. No men's clothing store anywhere. I asked a security guard about Brennan's Fine Menswear. He looked at me strangely. Sir, there hasn't been a men's store in that space for 3 years. That's where Brennan's used to be, but it burned down in 2020. Electrical fire. Killed the owner and 2 customers who got trapped inside. I showed him my receipt dated just 2 days ago. He examined it carefully, then shook his head. This receipt is from Brennan's, all right. But look at the date stamp. It says October 15th, 2020. That's the day of the fire. I looked at the receipt again. He was right. The date clearly showed 2020, not 2023, but that was impossible. I'd bought the clothes on Saturday, October 14th, 2023, the guard continued. The owner, William Brennan, was found at the cash register. Customers were Michael Torres and James Washington. All 3 died of smoke inhalation. The whole store burned to the ground in about 20 minutes. I went home and researched the fire online. Found newspaper articles, photos, everything. Brennan's Fine Menswear had indeed burned down on October 15th, 2020. The photos showed the same store layout I remembered, the same displays, even the same gold lettering on the sign. But according to the fire department report, something strange had happened that night. Witnesses reported seeing customers entering and leaving the store for hours after the fire started. People walking through the flames like they weren't there, carrying shopping bags, acting completely normal. One witness said, "I saw this man trying on clothes in the burning store. The whole place was engulfed in flames, but he was just standing there in front of a mirror, completely calm. When I called out to warn him, he turned and waved, then continued shopping. The fire had started in the electrical system around 9 p.m. But security cameras from other stores showed customers entering Brennan's until almost midnight, 3 hours after the fire department had declared the building a total loss. I found photos of the 3 victims. William Brennan, the owner, was the man who'd helped me shop. Same face, same age, same professional manner. He'd been dead for 3 years, but he'd sold me clothes just 2 days ago. That's when I realized what had happened. I hadn't shopped at a real store. I'd somehow walked into a ghost store, a supernatural echo of Brennan's that still existed in the same space where the real store had burned. The clothes I'd bought were from 2020, the day of the fire. They'd been burned in the blaze, but in the ghost store they looked perfect until I brought them home to the real world. I went back to the mall one more time, specifically at the same time I'd shopped on Saturday. 7:30 p.m., just as the mall was getting ready to close. I stood in front of the empty space where Brennan's used to be and waited. At exactly 7:45 p.m., the metal gates disappeared. The lights came on. The store materialized exactly as I'd seen it before, fully stocked, perfectly normal. William Brennan stood behind the counter, the same professional smile on his face. He waved at me through the window. But now I could see what I'd missed before. Smoke was seeping through the walls. The smell of burning fabric filled the air, and other customers in the store were moving strangely, their clothes smoldering, their skin blackened from smoke and fire. They were all shopping peacefully in a store that had burned down 3 years ago, buying clothes that had been destroyed in the fire, served by a man who had died trying to save his business. The ghost store exists every night from 7:45 p.m. until closing time. A perfect recreation of Brennan's fine menswear as it was on October 14th, 2020, the last day it operated. Normally, William Brennan and his final customers are still there, still serving and shopping, still going through the motions of their normal business day. They don't know they're dead. They don't know the store burned down. And they'll sell clothes to anyone who walks in just like they did to me. But those clothes carry the fire with them. When you take them into the real world, they show their true nature. Burned, destroyed, touched by the flames that took 3 lives and ended a business that had operated for 37 years. I still have the receipt. The ink is fading. The paper is starting to char around the edges. Sometimes I can smell smoke coming from my wallet where I keep it. If you're ever shopping late at a mall and find a store that seems too good to be true, check the date on your receipt before you leave. Some businesses never really close, even when they burn to the ground, and some sales are too hot to handle. This concludes our journey through 5 nights of horror stories from people working the graveyard shift. Remember, when darkness falls and most of the world sleeps, the boundary between our world and others becomes thin. Stay safe out there and always check your receipts.